Hello, my Kecklings. I wanted to do a little conversation piece about 1 week into the OP07 meta, how it feels, and realistically, I have gotten a lot of feedback I've seen on Twitter, Discord, personal friends, and also just result orientated. We're looking at, regionals and the store championships going on. There's a little bit of a rock paper scissors where there's like a rock that beats most things, but as we all know, rocks have the most amount of bricks in them, so it for some reason can do pretty bad against everything. And we'll kind of go into those topics. As far as you guys know, in OP07, Sakazuki is banned, so you can't play the best deck ever made. And Red Purple Law is very strong, but it didn't really get like a whole lot of support. And because of the way meta goes, right, some decks come in and out due to other popular decks. I first wanted to go over one thing is Gecko Moria. Where did that go? That ended up being the best deck in the end of the OP06.9 format, the pre-ban. I would say it definitely was the best deck of the format. And now it's just gone. I think most people stop playing that deck because it is very wide. It is still efficient. Like, it didn't get any worse or anything. But the big problem is that Black Yellow Luffy got a few additional cards, and Black Yellow Luffy already had a really good matchup into that. And so it's kind of interesting. A lot of people who played Gecko Moria just transitioned right over to Black Lucci. And it does have actually a better matchup into Black Yellow Luffy. And this is kind of the main standing point. I feel like at the end of this OP07 meta, there is going to be a whole lot of Lucci because, in my opinion, that deck, it may not be the most non-bricky deck, and this is kind of the rock of the format. It can actually do well even against its counterpart, which I'm going to call Black Yellow Luffy Paper here. It can actually sometimes punch through if you're able to play out 2 or 3 big guys, because it does play a whole lot of big guys. A lot of Lucci players have accepted they do play Ishio because it does help in other matchups in this sort of rock, paper, scissor format, and sometimes can beat that Lucci. But the unfortunate thing, and there's 2 different builds for Lucci. Fortunate thing, Lucci plays a lot of non-counter cards, sometimes over 20. And as you guys know, that kind of can get blown out by a lot of early game decks. And then what are the scissors of the format? I guess the scissors of this format would be just the fast decks, which is essentially just Red Purple Law. And there are other options as far as that goes. I think Red Purple Law actually can beat any deck, so it can cut any deck. And so it's kind of funny how we say rock, paper, scissors, but really any deck can beat anything as far as things go. But maybe that's more of like a Bonnie situation, because I do want to say the main thing I've realized and why this game has changed over the past year, if you look at this game since it was made in about a year ago, the game transitioned and changed in OP05 to follow a rule. And the number one rule of playing One Piece card game you have to follow is do not let your opponent play the game. Don't let them play out cards, eat up their hand. And every deck has their own different version of this don't let your opponent play the game. And you can see that the best decks in the format have a lot of aspects of either removal or frustration or resting. And some have a more clear format of that. Of course, as you guys know, all black decks have some sort of removal. And also Red Purple Law has removal. And if they are able to remove the cards off the board, well, that's pretty good. You're not really allowed to play the game. And you can't really kill your opponent if you can't attack with a character, right? So it ends up being kind of a value game, and black has really good value with Gecko Moria, but specifically Rob Lucci in that regard. The next deck really is actually Black Yellow Luffy. In a way, it does let your opponent play the game. You do have some forms of removal, and especially the new Rocket Luffy, which does help out with some of the more annoying cards. But generally, Black Yellow Luffy forces your opponent not to play the game because their leader becomes a 9k leader, and then they stay there. That's kind of the goal. And also, he attacks really, really big, so he can't really answer that. Luffy will eventually win through many big attacks, and you're kind of hoping that they brick or you're able to bottom deck their character cards, so you're eventually able to gas them out, which actually is a little harder than it used to be. But that's the kind of the new form of not letting your opponent play the game, just become a really big leader. And you can say there are a couple different forms of that, and it's kind of hard to deal with this Gecko Moria play, because essentially you just spit out a board, because that's just what Gecko Moria does. The next form of not letting your opponent play the game is Red Purple Law. I mean, as you guys know, it's fast. Fast decks are very good at not letting your opponent play the game, but it also has its own form of removal. And you could even say Red Green Law is very, very fast. I did just win a European regional. And the main thing with that is if people don't remember, Law back in OP01, 2, 3, 4 was honestly the strongest deck that existed because of how fast it was. And I don't really see the deck getting any slower. Maybe it has better mid-game plays now. But yeah, it's fairly strong as far as speed goes, and that's another way not letting your opponent play the game. On top of that, you do have niche decks like Nami. Nami doesn't play the game with anybody. It just plays by itself, and you're forced to kind of figure out a puzzle, and hopefully they didn't get too much luck out of their triggers. And then there's Bonnie, the new form of not letting your opponent play the game. There are a lot of different force reactions against this. Bonnie is at a big uptrend because other decks are on an uptrend. So earlier in this video, we talked about how popular Black Yellow Luffy was in the meta. And with that, Bonnie does have a good matchup because of the rest effect. But on top of that, Black Yellow Luffy doesn't have a lot of ways to answer 9-cost Zoro, but even then, you may not even need 9-cost Zoro, because 8-cost Kid is actually pretty obnoxious to deal with. And essentially, Bonnie's the new don't let your opponent play the game, damage deny, and eventually win the game just by playing down Hody Jones and just being an efficient deck. Now, on top of that, you could also look at Perona being kind of a similar mindset of a green-black, where it's able to play Gecko Moria, get a value engine, don't let your opponent play an actual board, and have Ryumo removal, and just draw a lot of cards. So it has another form of not letting your opponent play the game. And then currently, blue is kind of the outlier here, and it's kind of the middle deck, but it does have even more of just removal with Raging Tiger at bottom decks cards, so people can't even recur them from the trash. And in the form of Blue Doflamingo, it has a little bit more aggressive avenues, and to be honest, I'm kind of seeing a lot more favor right now because things are slowing down, and playing Boa Hancock, because quite often you're not actually even using Blue Dofi's skill just because of how much control, but that's just from my own experiences. I don't want that to vary too much. I think Blue Dofi and Blue Boa Hancock have its words and ranges within the gameplay, but as far as things go, I find that this form of removal is actually quite difficult for Bonnie right now. But essentially, it feels like I'm hearing a lot of good regional winners or tops going on, and essentially any deck can win at any time. But what's the most efficient or right choice if you were to go to an online regional at the end of the month or go to locals this week? And really just essentially take your pick. Take a look at your locals, especially players that you may know and what they might bring, and then kind of do this analysis of what's most likely to do well, in my opinion, and what options you can do, especially the strong players and especially the really, really strong players of each local or tournament. You do have to play around them a little bit, because if you're going to do well, you're going to have to face them at some point, and you want to have an option. But number one, and I guess my number one rule, always pick something that's fun to you. And my number 2 rules, don't try to cope too much on any specific leader or character just because you really like that leader. Try to look at it from a standpoint of just a card game and words and text, and have an idea of what works well against anything else. Because that's going to be the main thing. I do want to say rule number 1 likes to override rule number 2, is fun is more important than winning most of the time, but they do go hand in hand. So if you were to kind of go through this whole rock, paper, scissors, 1, 2, 3, rule number 1, rule number 2, don't let your opponent play the game format, what would you hypothesize as a good overall option in general? I will say there's like certain price points, and a lot of people, they have fallen off of red, purple law. And so you kind of can play matchups that are okay in a red, purple law, but they're angled toward other decks. My personal opinion is that Rob Lucci is going to be essentially the big deck where it just gets away with whatever it wants to do as long as it doesn't brick, even though it doesn't have a lot of consistent choices as far as things go. In a long tournament that may not be good enough, the deck is so good in a standard 10 games, it's only going to lose to itself maybe twice, and then the rest of the games are going to be based off of gameplay. Black Yellow Luffy is a combo deck, but a lot of people are playing this deck not knowing how the combos work, or that deck also is prone to bricking as well. But I feel like right now, your whole goal should be your deck is angled to beat Black Yellow Luffy or naturally beat Black Yellow Luffy. You have to have some options against that because it is honestly the most popular deck and being said to be the most best deck in format. And that's kind of where we're at with this new cycle of Lucci being the best, Black Yellow Luffy, and then back up to Bonnie. So Bonnie does really, really good against Black Yellow Luffy. Doesn't do good against Lucci, but they're kind of figuring out how to play against Lucci, playing multiple cards a turn, getting boards out there, and hoping that Rob Lucci can gas out at some point. It is kind of a hard deck to gas out, or just kind of over the span of a game, maybe barely come out on top. And from there, I think we're actually at this point right now that everyone looks at Bonnie as one of the best fun decks right now. You can kind of look at the prices just on TCG Player as an indication of that. And that's going to be the new deck in order to beat. But the thing is, again, it is a rock, paper, scissors, and hopefully your rock can cut through paper half the time, and seeing where things go. Let me know in the comments what you guys are playing, and if you're looking to jump into specific other decks or rogue decks that are popping up. I do want to take this time to especially thank all my patrons. My Patreon just passed $1,000 a month in subscriptions. Honestly, I'm so happy. And I'm very happy that my patrons do support me. If you want to be a patron and support me making these videos and eating chicken sandwiches and also all the other guides you will see on OP07, the link will be down in the description below. And please join the Discord server. Talk about any meta relative actions that are going on, deck lists, and honestly tournament reports. And I kind of want to make my Discord a place of good players coming in for practice. I'm starting to get that a little bit more together, so join that if you're looking for good effective practice either on webcam or the sim. And if you like the video, make sure you guys like. I do appreciate those likes, they go a long way. And subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao.